QB chasing.
G'day, listeners. This episode is proudly brought to you by our major sponsor, Gym Journal. Please use the code MATTER, all capitals, at checkout, and you'll receive a discount on your next purchase. Please find the link in the description. G'day, listeners, and welcome back to another very special episode of the Matter Mentality podcast, where we talk all things training, nutrition, and psychology to optimize your performance. This morning, I'm joined by another very, very smart, very special guest on the podcast, Dr. Dylan Seeley. How are you doing, brother?
Good, man. How are you? I know it's earlier time.
Man, we're getting used to it now at this point. This is becoming day to day. I never thought I'd be thought I'd be someone getting up at 3, 4 a.m. to talk across the world, but here we are. Makes it fun. Mate, pretty much what we're going to do today, as a lot of the guests are probably are used to at this point, I bring on someone that is very unique in their field and very good at what they do and very educated what they're doing. And luckily for us, there's a plethora of those in the mastermind group. So I have a never-ending access to smart people that are very good at what they do. What I want is to get into your background, which is quite unique. Like, you have your doctorate in chiropractic, and we've kind of just gone through that. But the way you work with people is quite different, I find. Like, I've watched you, I've asked questions, I've followed your stuff, and the way you work with athletes, you work with individuals. It's not just like you're just doing manipulation. So I want to get into how unique your approach is, and kind of bring a bit more information to people in the way that you do things, because to me it's unique and it's interesting. So pretty much what I want to get going with is give us a background as to how you got started, because I know you've got in Inferno Peformance, you've interned with a mentor of both of ours, Cav. Spent a lot of time with him and spent a lot of time in his corner, which is like, that's just a level of knowledge you get access to that most people dream of. So, mate, give us a background as to how you got started into doing what you do.
Dumb luck, honestly. So,
Podcast done.
so I was always a good athlete, but I was a shithead student. I just never cared much for school. And I went to like a small junior college, and I realized like I was going to go there just to play sports. And I realized I really didn't want to play this one sport anymore. So I came back home, and all of my friends were pretty much in and out of trouble. And I realized I was going to be down that same path if I didn't, find something to take me out of it. So I remember I had a big interest in like exercise and exercise science. I remember for my 17th birthday, I got an exercise physiology textbook because that's what I asked for. And I just kind of dove into it. I wanted to learn everything about it. I mean, shit, dude, I was reading Paul Quinn articles at like 17, 18 and beating the shit out of myself. BT, knowing how dumb that is now. Uh, so yeah, I've always had a big interest in it. And Cav was 5 minutes from the house. So when I shot off this the application, he rang me, I think like the next day, and it was like probably like 4 p.m. or so. And I had just taken pre-workout because I was gonna hit the gym. And I took the original Jack formula before it was banned because all these pussies started Jacks. And he called me up, and I don't think I put together like a single coherent sentence. Like I probably said, and he was like, just show up at the gym the next day. And I said, okay. So I showed up, and then we just kind of hit it off. And I interned for him for about 2 years, and then he brought me on to work for him. And then from there, like I finished the Duke route, and he was like, you got to keep going to school. And when I originally came back home, because I really didn't want to play baseball anymore, I switched over to playing rugby full time. And then got recruited by a couple different schools and ended up just signing over to this one and playing there. So I got my undergrad in physio. He told me don't do anything exercise science related. He said it's the biggest bullshit you'll ever pick. He was like, I want you to pick something medical. So I went with the physio route. So I did that. My whole plan was to come back and work for him when I was done. And I remember coming back, and he goes, yeah, I'm not going to hire you. I go, what the fuck are you talking about? And he goes, I won't hire you until you have a doctorate in something. So at this point now I'm panicking because I'm going into probably the last semester of school at university. And I looked there's a physical therapy campus not too far off from the gym. So I applied to there, and I didn't realize when you apply in physical therapy in the US, what has to happen is you send your transcripts and everything off to this agency, and then the agency sends it over to the university. The problem is the middleman can take 4 to 6 weeks to send your stuff over to the university. At this point, you've already missed the deadline. And that's what happened to me.
Oh,
So yeah, so I was shitting bricks and I had no plan, no clue of what I wanted to do. Um, and I was playing at a tournament, a rugby tournament, and my coach goes, there's this chiropractic school that'll give out scholarships. If you're good enough, you can go there. So I ended up shooting an email to the coach. They invited me onto campus, got to hop in a practice session with the boys, and then got offered on the spot, and then was just decided to go there. And then it's just kind of carried me down this route. But funny enough, so the whole reason I went to go get a doctor is to go back to work for Cav, and now I don't even work for him.
such a cab thing to do.
Yeah. So yeah, it was funny because so going into I kind of back this story up. So while at the undergraduate level, um, I was playing rugby league, and which
Mhm.
as an American is not very common.
Yeah.
So I was playing rugby league, and I was getting closer to cracking like the national team side. And
Mhm.
my coach at the time was like, just come back home with me to Australia. Um, and I think you'd be a shoo-in if you get a season in there and you come back. So that was originally going to be the plan, was to go back to him, stay with him and play in Newcastle for a year, and then come
Mhm.
back to the US. But I broke my back, so I was playing 15s and I was playing scrum half, and somebody shot offside and they didn't call it. So he just picked me up and dump tackled the shit out of me and broke my back. And I didn't
Oh.
realize it until we had a gym session 2 days later, and I was doing deadlifts, and I felt just kind of off. I'm like, "Ah, I'm
Mhm.
not going to force it." So I went over and was doing accessory work for glute ham raise, and then just felt a crack.
Oh.
And and after that point, my legs just kind of stopped working. Like they almost went numb. And I was like,
Yeah.
I'm fucked. I know
Yeah.
it. So that kind of like me into then going down that route of like I wanted to continue to play rugby, but I know I'm never going to play at the same level after
Mhm.
that. And nobody really picked this up until 2 years down the road. So the x-ray looked clean, but then nobody wanted to order the MRI. Now, like the team doc was like, oh no, x-ray's fine. I think you're gonna be good. And then it just got progressively worse. But I had just signed on to play at the chiropractic school like a couple months later. So I couldn't tell them that I was hurt. So I played through it for about 2 years because I was worried I was going to lose my scholarship. And at that point, like at the end of the 2 years, I just kind of transitioned over to helping out with the strength conditioning and the coaching side of things. So I just coached the backs. But yeah, it absolutely wrecked me. But funny enough, this is actually how I got connected into my father-in-law. Cav is good friends with my father-in-law, Dr. Eric Serrano. I think some of your listeners might know him.
Mhm.
So he connected me with him, and Serrano was the one that actually found the fracture because he ordered the MRI and he found the fracture and pretty much explained like what I've been trying to tell all these other doctors. Nobody believed me because they're like, there's no way you should still be able to play through, a fracture in your low back.
Yeah, that's fucking that's an interesting I don't even know. To having done what I've done to my back and knowing that I push doctors to try and make sure they found something. So to get to a point where you're like, I don't know, it's kind of indicative of how important your sports route is. Not in a dig way, but they would rather, I don't know, in my opinion, would rather not know and just let you just fucking send it. Like if you're there to play sport, you're there to play sport, right? Is that a fair assessment?
That's pretty much how it is in the US because it's I mean, I'm sure it's there across every country, but we call it like the next man up theory. Like if you're not going to do the job, it's just the next man up.
Yeah,
And for the US, like scholarships are usually guaranteed even if you get injured because you have an injury scholarship that covers you.
yeah,
The problem is it has to fall under an NCAA sport, and rugby is not a
yeah.
sanctioned NCAA sport for men in the US. So at any moment, your scholarship could get pulled. I remember guys would be getting called into the office because they just had a shit few games, and they'd be like, "Hey, we're docking you $2,000." Like, it's fucked.
Jesus.
Yeah,
Well,
so I mean it was shitty to have some of that. But luckily like some of the coaches that I played under where I had my scholarship, they were great because you can also kind of break the rules now. Now your coaches can pay for you to go home to see your family because a lot of kids are coming from like impoverished backgrounds, like they can't afford to do that. The
yeah,
NCAA would have called that infraction and said no, you can't do that. But our coaches were coming out like buying us meals, or the alumni were giving us, an envelope with a couple $100 in it if you had a good game.
that's wild. That's such a like. I've said it to a few of you guys when you come on here now. Like at our university level, there's nothing like that for rugby league. I know we have rugby over here is our very university dominant sport, but
Yeah.
in the background that I had coming up playing like touch rugby league, playing decent level of schoolboys at rugby league, there was no like, we won basically one of the highest level tournaments that you can in high school. There's no one even at our game on the bus home. There's no one even waiting for us to be like, oh, good game. Let alone here's a few $100. Here's this going on. Don't tell anyone about that. Like it just didn't happen. Like it might have been at some of the more advanced schools, but we just don't get it.
Yeah, the sporting culture is unreal. Like growing up playing American football, the high school that I played at was one of the best in the country. And I remember we had a game, and this was before this was ever like a thing. Now it's really common, but we had a sponsorship by Nike, which was like kind of unheard of at the time back in 2010. And or no, this would have been 2009. So
Mhm.
we had a sponsorship by Nike back in 2009, and then our game got televised, and I think we had 8,000 people at the game. Like imagine that as like a 14, 15-year-old and having 8,000 people show up to watch you play.
Yeah, one of the things that I said to Cam when we come over next is like we want to go to we want to go to each level. Like I want to go watch a high school game, a collegiate game, and obviously the NFL. But like it's just like we've watched watched Friday Night Lights, Remember the Titans, all that sort of shit, and it's not something we have. Even if you play like Marsden and Wavell, two of the strongest rugby league schools in Queensland, and Queensland is the dominant rugby league state. There is no like 10,000 kids at your game or people at your game watching you play. It's just, oh yeah, these two teams are playing. Here's a local park that's probably got like 100 people at it. And that's like, it's a whole other world. Even just driving past the stadiums and watching the opportunity, you just see the opportunities that come from those fields because we just don't have it. And it's like, you see like, millions of dollars worth of setup and like the lighting system, the stands, the music, the sound systems, a lot like everything is just this amazing facility to play a sport. And we just, some of the fields that we played at, I'm fairly certain were rubbish dumps that got turfed over.
We had a regional semifinal game. I remember this like vividly, and it absolutely pissed down the night before in the field. And then we had a grass field at the time, and it was like pretty much unplayable. They had someone fly in a helicopter and hovered above the field to try and blow off all the excess water so we could play.
That's such an American thing to do for sport. Oh, that's
Yeah,
fantastic.
that and fucking shotguns at the sky, hoping it'll deter the rain.
Oh, that's brilliant. I love it. That's so good. That's such an American sport thing to do. But how do you like
Oh, it's
going
nuts.
back to going back moving to rugby? It is a very unique American sport. Like it's not as anywhere near as common for you guys. So how did you go with the transition? Because like one of the things I've found is people with sporting backgrounds, people with competitive backgrounds, they're tending to be people who get into stuff that are a bit different, but at the same time, like it's indicative of traits, skills, and abilities that end up carrying you forward in life. And I found that. So the ability to go, I guess, pivot sports and then want to take that sport on at such a high level. Did you find that was an interesting step in America? Like people confused why you did it. It didn't make much sense, or no one really gives a shit.
It was a mix of like people were confused and nobody gives a shit. So
Yeah.
I grew up like in a very like based area. So my
Yeah.
best friend's dad played for Samoa. Like so rugby was like culture for him. He's Samoan. So like
Yeah.
you would see it all the time. And like surprisingly enough, the DC area actually has some of the best youth rugby in the country, like in the US.
Oh wow.
So like six of the top teams are in like in the DC area. So it's always like been prevalent. It's just not as like it's not televised like you would watch a high school basketball game or a high school
Yeah.
football game or whatever else. It's just not super common, but there is some good rugby being played from like an American standpoint there. So it's not like people were completely like shocked,
Yeah.
but the transition that I made was like I was a very good baseball player. So I'm like a lot of people in my family have played, or at least my cousin, played in the professional baseball ranks. Great uncle played in the professional baseball ranks. And then I was like, trying to go and play at a higher level because I had, I got recruited by some fairly decent schools for baseball coming out of high school. And then I realized I just didn't want to play baseball anymore. So,
Yeah.
but I always wanted to switch over to playing rugby because I remember my buddy's dad just talking about it all the time and all the, the fun that he had and just watching clips of it. And at the time, the only rugby you could watch was French rugby because the
Yeah.
ESPN had a contract. So we used to stream in like La Rochelle and everything else, watching this, like being like, oh man, I could really do this. Like, I want to play this. This looks fun as fuck.
Hmm.
So when I came back, transferred back from the junior college back to just a local community college and started working for Cav, I was also playing rugby at the time. And I
Yeah.
didn't know you could like go to school either. So at the time, I was actually playing like pretty well. I was getting coached by like a former US national team player.
Hmm.
And he's like, well, yeah, actually like considered putting full effort into this and actually like trying to have a go at it. And I was like, oh, like not so much, but now I'm interested. So that kind of led me down the route of like playing select sides and everything else. So most Americans crack into rugby when they're at the university level. They're already 18. So like the fundamental skills are lacking, but the athleticism, they kind of make up for it.
Yeah.
But now you're getting in the US system that are playing at, at grassroots level. So I think the skill level is going to be they're going to catch up and not just rely upon the athleticism as much. So I'm
Yeah.
kind of excited to see that transition. It's just the organization as a whole is just kind of a shit show from top down. So I don't think rugby will ever get to that point where it's that good in the US, but it's
Yeah.
definitely getting better from like a skills standpoint from what it was 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, it's always like anything that you guys decide to get into, I think always has or just that natural progression of just there's so many of you and there's so much money and ability and like general talent pool to just eventually get better. So I'm interested to see how rugby league because I know you guys are starting even field rugby league teams now. To be able to see how that progresses as a sport as like the country, it just the second you guys commit to something, right, it just takes off. So there's no doubt that like getting into rugby as a sport as a more nationally recognized thing just makes it a better game and better talent pool.
Well, so USA plays Canada next week because they have that Vegas round in the NRL next
Yeah,
weekend.
yeah.
Um, so USA plays Canada as like the intro game to that, and I've already got I'm working with two athletes on the US national team like that are playing in that game.
Awesome.
Uh, so yeah, it's getting better.
Yeah.
Like definitely the level of stuff and like but it's very regional too. Like I mean, you can vouch for that in Australia. Like
Yeah.
Western Australia, it's not going to be the same as Eastern,
Yeah,
and we're in
100%.
the same boat here. Like you only really see it on the Eastern side, but not so much the Western. Now
Yeah.
15s and 7 is all across, but league is mostly on the Eastern.
Yeah, it's very much a turf dominant sort of sport, like where Western Australia tried it, South Australia tried it, didn't take off, didn't land very well. I think I tried it twice actually. And then it came to like, Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria dominated for a while there. Um, and it's basically just like the entire population of the East Coast plays rugby league, AFL. But yeah, it's like it's not a sport you get a lot from talent from the Western Coast. But it's a like
And
it's
it
an go.
yeah, I mean it's very regional. Even like if you look at basketball, I mean it's usually colder weather sports, so you're going to see more teams in the north that played and have very good success, aside from a few private academies in the south. Same thing like if you watch, baseball, it's in football, it's the teams in the south that
Yeah.
dominate warmer weather. Just because they can play year round. And then ice hockey, you're not really finding kids in the South that are playing it. It's usually the kids up
Yeah.
north by the Canadian border that are dominating it. So, I mean, sport is just very regional. It's based upon the weather that you have and the access to, field or in an arena.
Yeah, that's true. And like the interesting part for you guys, like two or three states literally is the size of our entire country's population. That's the thing that blows my mind over there. It's like when you look at what's available, like even like Florida, Texas, like these states that are massive in NFL or like even grassroots gridiron, like you have population potentials that are basically the size of our country in one state. And it's just purely dedicated to like grassroots football up into collegiate and a gridiron, and then you're looking at like NFL and things like that. But it just ends up being such a, like, I don't know how to describe it. It's just a life in that state built around that sport. Like it becomes like that's what you do. And it's like that in
Yeah.
itself just expands the talent pool and the skill acquisition and the ability, the funding, the development. Like we have to go around the entire country to find as many people that you can have in one stage ready to play a sport.
A lot of it just comes down to opportunity. Like if you look at some of the best athletes that are coming out, the only way that they make it out of their situation is through sport.
Mm.
And that's honestly like one of the biggest drivers for the sporting industry here is that a lot of them aren't going to make it out. I mean, I've spent some time growing up in some or hanging out at least in some, shittier areas. And within that, I mean, I was playing with guys that were just absolute freaks, but they were either dead or in jail by the
Yeah.
time that they were, 18. So, I mean, I even coach kids like on the S&C side of things. I mean, this one kid was one of the top recruits in the country, but just like couldn't stay out of trouble and then,
Yeah.
couldn't get the grades up and then got picked up by a junior college. And most kids who go play in a junior college, if they're not getting signed, they're fucked. Like they're
Yeah.
just back to, their old habits. And sure enough, like this kid caught a gun charge on him like a year into school. And this kid was absolutely dominant. I mean, was an absolute freak. Better than some of the other kids on the team. And some of the other kids on the team were like big time Division I prospects. I mean, playing at major universities in the country. And he was better than all these kids.
It's so disheartening because there's like, I guess it's that emphasis on, I shouldn't say the sporting culture, but like I remember watching Coach Carter, and it was such a powerful scene where he's like, "They are student athletes, so the student has to come first," and emphasizes like we need to get these kids actually out of where they were. They were in Virginia, weren't they? No, they were. Oh shit,
I think that was Richmond, California for that one.
Richmond. Yeah, and like the whole emphasis is to get them out of that trouble spot, right? Like we need to get them graduated, not just into playing sport at the college level. We actually need to get them eligible to be able to play and go to college, so they can get something like out of themselves and get away from, Cruz ends up shooting someone or whatever it is and ends up on, in trouble. But it's like how many athletes are in that potential position because student athlete isn't emphasized as the primary focus. It's like, yeah, just get them through so they can play sport, but then they screw up. That's it. They're done.
Yeah. I mean, I had one of my fighters today. He texted me this morning because he couldn't make it to the S&C session. And the reason is because he was at court trying to like testify on behalf of one of his athletes. Like he coaches youth wrestling and one of his kids is caught a charge and he's gone in front of the judge telling him like, hey, this is, if we can get him through wrestling, we can get him out of the situation.
That's
Right.
rough.
But like that's not a common thing for most people, but that happens way more in the US than people think. Like when
Yeah.
you're actually coaching on the level, you're coaching athletes that are coming from these areas.
I mean, it's a like well, it's not a perfect transition, but it's a great way to kind of move into, an interesting thing for me is where your education is, where your background is. Like you said, Cav made you get into physio. You got your doctorate in chiropractic. You've moved into these things, but you didn't go kind of just specifically to the medical route. Like you stayed in sport, and you stayed like you're with fighters now. Like I watch a lot of your stories where you're working with guys who end up in fights. I'm pretty sure if I remember we were talking about it, you had someone in a UFC fight, or was it at least a professional ranked fight?
Yeah, I've worked on some of the guys in UFC.
Yeah, and like that to me is an interesting route of progression. Like you said, you got the medical route of education, but you use your education in a much more specific, unique way where you're working with such top level guys that it's not just about, you know, the standard medical model. It's kind of like you're using manipulation therapy to make your athletes better. And you work more directly, specifically with, I guess, combining S&C, combining your physio degree, and then moving into chiropractic and rehab. You're manipulating guys to be better and be able to handle their sports, I guess, long term, rather than just looking as like let's just give you a little bit less back pain to go to work. That'd be a fair assessment, like I guess, like the
Right.
way how to go about things.
Yeah, I mean, it just comes down to like you're either thriving or you're surviving.
Yeah,
Like I'd rather my people thrive than just survive. And like the basic medical model in the US is just kind of based around survival. Like we
yeah,
just need to make sure you're not dying, like not necessarily living your best life. And that's where I get brought in, especially with these athletes, is like I have the pedigree of working with, high level S&C. So I understand the needs of their sport
hmm
as well as I understand the medical side as well. So if you can get someone who can, some things you might work on somebody and you go, well, I should probably fix that up. But on an athlete, like trying to restore balance in a sport where it might be inherently asymmetrical, like you're gonna make that person worse.
Yeah.
That's where having the knowledge and the know-how of, my background in sport, the background in the S&C, even coaching at a high level, you know what to do and what not to do. But I'm also, because I've worked in the S&C and because I played at like a high level in sport, I'm also willing to push my people harder. Because if, my joke with them is if I break you, I'm just going to build you back up. So it's okay.
I'm licensed to break you, and I'm also licensed to fix you up a bit.
Yeah.
I mean, that in and of itself, just like it's a very different approach. Like even over here, I think 80% of physiotherapists and rehabilitation practitioners haven't even set foot in a gym. Like they haven't even set foot in a commercial gym or a commercial training facility where they understand what the environment's like, the loading's like, the training's like, that someone's trying to probably fix. And I get that most people that go to physio are probably just Joe Blow, blue collar worker who wants to be less pain to pick up steel work or pick up concrete or timber. But when it comes to an athlete, a lot of the time I'm very hesitant in who I refer my athletes to, because a lot of the time over here it's like they undermine the coach and basically say, no, you're not doing any of that for 6-12 months until this is better, which ends up degrading the athlete or having them revert and go backwards. And then I've got to try and recorrect that mindset and get them back into their training, get them back to what they're doing, which I've just found an absolute hurdle. So getting to someone that actually understands like this can be implemented, this can be put in place whilst you're also still training and going and pushing through it, I think is an absolute necessity for just sport in general. Like having an athlete trust that you're not just going to have them get worse, I think is a huge tool. Because the second that an athlete gets an injury, the first thing they do is, well, fuck, this is over. And you're going to spend 12
Yeah.
months not letting them train properly. I think it's an absolute dog shit approach in most physio that I've seen.
That's kind of, yeah, that's what I noticed more so from like the surgeons and some of the people that I work with is that like I had a kid, basketball player, had a foot fracture, had a pin put through it. And they said his pin was fully healed by November. And they were like, all right, you can start up like rehab, like pretty much last week of November, first week of December. All right. They told this kid that he was going to be more than likely missing the whole entire like high school basketball season. So he wouldn't play like until May or April, right? And I'm like, his coach brought him in and he told me that. I'm like, that's the biggest load of shit, right? That makes no sense. I got the kid back playing by the second week of January, full go, like full speed, not like we're just working into it, but he was already like playing at the varsity level back within that within 5 weeks, 5 or 6 weeks. So, I mean, it's crazy if you just put the limitations on kids, yeah, no shit, like they're gonna, sit around and get worse. But even in the process of just sitting around, there's plenty of shit you can do in the meantime.
Yeah.
Like I can throw, even if you're in a boot, like I can throw you on an assault bike or I can throw you
Yeah.
on a spin bike and get you catch your cardio. And then there's plenty of shit we can do upper body wise as
Yeah.
well. So I think it's a big pain in the ass. But oddly enough, too, there's also now this big approach with like movement optimism in the physio world, like all the new physios that are coming out. And it is essentially like your body can adapt to anything,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like you can lift, you can look like a dog taking a shit if you're pulling sumo and do that with 200 kilos and be completely fine. And
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, does it actually work like that? And I think that's the big disconnect because with them, it's the if you don't have the research to back it up, like they don't give a shit. And you can't put somebody in a research study like that, right? That's like my biggest gripe with people because I think this was actually an Australian study, or it might have been Norwegian, but they looked at picking up like boxes, whether you were like in a squatted form or like stooped rounded over form.
Yeah.
And they said like, oh, it doesn't make a difference like on injury rate. But if you actually read the study, the boxes were 10 kilos. No fucking shit, nobody got hurt. Like when was the last time you got hurt picking up 10 kilos bent over? Like it's an everyday, we do that all the time.
Yeah, that's an interesting one to extrapolate, right? Like if someone doesn't know what they're reading, you take that and all of a sudden they're deadlifting or lifting like an actual steel frame because oh well it doesn't matter. You just increase the risk of the injury because you had the study limitation being a 10 kilo box. That means nothing.
Yeah.
You grade that out and increase the load. Someone goes, well, this study said this, and then you all of a sudden pull T3 and 4, and you're just like, well, now you're fucked.
And that's the biggest thing with a lot of the stuff. Like, yeah, you can adapt, but to what point? And two, like, is it really that efficient? Like I just break things down into like, is it going to be efficient or not?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a variability within technique, but it really just comes down to efficiency, right? And I think we're extrapolating out a lot of shit. And just because you adapt doesn't necessarily mean it's beneficial. There's plenty of strong men who lift in that rounded out position. And yeah, they're strong as fuck because that's kind of the nature of the sport. But what a lot of people don't see is on the tail end of their career, they end up with spinal stenosis because the ligament, like within that's holding the spine, has to hypertrophy with it so
Yeah.
that the spine doesn't load. Well, if the ligament hypertrophies, the spinal canal now narrows. So now I have less room for the nerve to move. Yeah, it was a beneficial adaptation at the time, but now that
Yeah.
I'm done, like not so much. So I think it's important to have that level of understanding. Like if you've lifted at a high level or competed at a high level, like it's also, and you can apply this to any sport. Like the surgeon who did this kid's foot, when he was done, he said, I read him back. He'd been completely fine. He'd already been practicing, and he'd been practicing for a whole week, and then he had his post-op with the surgeon to get full like clearance to play in the game. And what he said is, "Oh, I want you to wear the shoe insert." Well, the shoe insert like made no sense because it pushed him towards the inside of his foot. I'm like, that's gonna hurt your foot a hell of a lot more because we've been training you to be normal, and now we're throwing you into a completely different position.
Mhm.
And the surgeon's thought was, well, I'm just gonna take load off the fracture site. Well, the fracture's been fucking healed, right? Like this insert could have been used 6 months ago, not right now. So sure enough, like the school physio made him wear it and play in it. And then I see him the next day. He goes, "How you feel?" He goes, "Oh, it hurts so bad. My foot's killing me." I said, "Okay, yeah, you're done. We're not wearing this anymore." And he was like, "But my surgeon told me." I was like, "When was the last time?" He was like, "I think the what I told him was, how good of an athlete do you think your surgeon is? When was the last time you played a pickup basketball game?" And he goes, "No." Right? I said, "So then how does he truly know the demands of the sport?" Because in the US, like we have these contracts with the high schools, and if you get hurt, you just get sent to this person. They might not have any knowledge of the sport itself. Like
Oh,
they have a general knowledge,
yeah.
but they don't have the distinct knowledge of like the nuances of how the biomechanics work. They just know how the biomechanics work in a global perspective, but not necessarily how it works in the sport. And the mechanics of the sport might be different from what you would do day to day. So you could really fuck people up if you don't know the nuances of that.
That's an interesting, like, given the resources that America has, I guess it depends on the success of the school and I guess local funding. But given the money and the resources involved in American sport at high school or collegiate level, I'm surprised there isn't so much more specificity to the type of referral that you'll use. Is it just simply like who's available, or this person managed to like weasel a contract, or it's just they think this person's good, or
All the hospital systems, so it's regional. Like back in Virginia, we didn't have this problem in the DC area, but now that I live in Ohio, all the hospital systems have contracts with the schools. So they contract out the physio, and then if anything goes wrong, the physio refers back to the hospital system.
yeah,
So, and it's the same thing with their S&C. The S&C is contracted out by the hospital system. I've talked to some of the S&C coaches, and like I'm fucking dumbfounded by some of the dumb shit they're doing. But it's ultimately they have job security
yeah.
because there's no checks and balances. Like who are you getting vetted by? Someone who has no fucking clue about S&C. Same thing. If you're a physio, like who are you getting vetted by? Someone who has no idea like who's good or bad within physio. So that's the problem is that there's no push to be better because the job security's there.
Yes, that's
And
a
you're just gonna get with whoever, whoever's on their roster.
that kind of I guess as like an athlete too, it leads to the white coat fallacy, right? Like you got that appeal to authority where you just think the guy in the lab coat is correct or an expert, so you do what he says. You don't know to vet that doctor or get a second opinion or look somewhere else, right? Like you end up in this hospital or this physio room with an injury that you think was probably now going to take you 6 months to heal. With someone like yourself, with a more multitudinal or multifactorial approach that actually gets someone back faster, you're ending up being told this could take 6 months, so you believe it. And now all of a sudden you missed half your season that could potentially lead to a contract to go play collegiate level or get that next grade. Like that to me is a wild approach with how important your school sports system is to graduate out of dangerous environments, socioeconomic areas. Like it's such an important factor of some people growing up or getting out of those areas. and you've got people put in positions of authority that don't really belong being there.
Yeah. But again, there's no vetting system. There's no checks and balances of who actually knows their shit and who doesn't. Because the person that you answer to also doesn't know what the fuck they're doing. And that's where it gets tricky. So it's really even like at the professional level, like the hockey team, the professional hockey team in town. I ended up with one of their players because they had botched his concussion and he'd only been getting worse over the course of these 2 weeks. So after I got a call from him, I took a look at him. Within the first 2 days, we were talking and he was kind of moving his head around and he heard a click and I heard it too. And I go, they ever x-ray your neck? He goes, no, they just been, manipulating it and doing a bunch of needling and massage and everything else, but it just keeps getting tighter and tighter. So I was like, okay, I sent the kid for an x-ray. He had a fracture in his neck.
Oh,
Professional athlete, broken neck. And they're fucking like wailing away at it. And they're trying to rush this kid back onto the ice and they can't figure out why he's not getting better.
that is
Like it just blows my right. Like that's day one stuff. If a kid slams his head off the ice and his neck is stiff, you tend to like you're gonna x-ray it just to be safe. Like they're not even doing their due diligence.
is that a level of like preferred ignorance? Like if we don't know, we can't stop him from playing.
Well, I think like it just comes down to again, how you get into pro sport is your company pays money to be the official doctor of this team. Like
Right.
that's how this shit works. It's crazy. So when the New York Yankees wanted my father-in-law to be their team doctor, he had a call on the phone with them and they go, okay, 225,000. He goes, yeah, that's good. You guys can pay me 225,000 for the year. And they go, no, we want you to pay us 225,000 to be the team doctor. He was like, get the fuck out of here. Like, I'm not doing that. But that's crazy. Like that's how people get these contracts. And it's not because they're good. It's not because of like, who they or even who they know. It's literally the fact that they got deep pockets.
That is,
Some of the doctors in the system are good, but they're not great. I mean, the fact that you missed a simple neck fracture
yeah.
blows my mind. And then even some of the concussion stuff, like the pro sports teams are terrible. Like going through talking to, some of the athletes. I just consulted with another athlete. He's a pro hockey player in the DC area. He's been dealing with lingering concussion symptoms for the last month, and it's not getting any better.
That's one thing I'll give Australia. We went really hard on concussion policy over probably the last 10 years. We had more changes in when it comes to rugby league. Anyway, we had more changes in the last decade to player protection than we had in the first 110 years of sport. And it's all been like around the idea of protecting the neck, protecting the head. Like, yeah, you have to be aware of the fact that there's only so much mitigation of risk you can really implement in a contact sport, like two front rowers running each other. But at the same time, it's
Yeah.
like, especially when where, as you know, rugby is a lot more of a consistent sport at speed versus a stop-start high collision sport like NFL. But at the same time, like when you do collide, you connect. It's usually two guys at a pretty decent pace. And for the first probably 100 years of rugby league, there was no who cares if you end up on your neck. There was spear tackles. There was fucking tip you on your head tackles. Like no one gave a shit. Then all of a sudden, in the last 10 years, there's been that many changes that they're trying to protect the head, reduce concussion risks. So probably one thing I'll give Australian rugby league is the identification of how bad concussions have got or were getting. And we're not even in a sport of high level collision like I would say NFL is. That's probably something that we definitely probably stepped up with and tried to reduce. You get a lot of you get a lot of the old stock sort of saying like, it's pussy's football now. But at the same time, recognizing that it's to protect players not dying from brain damage is probably a good thing.
Yeah. And honestly, like Australia's been way ahead of the curve when it comes to the medical side of things too. Like just talking with, I remember he was with AFL. He was with Swans, and then he was with fuck, forget the other one. But he also worked in the AIS. Like super brilliant guy, and he came over here and presented in the US. And I mean the topics and the medical stuff that he was presenting was like leaps and bounds ahead of what we were just dealing with.
Really?
And it like I think yeah, I would say like Australia does far better on the medical side of things, like of getting people back from injury, like the protocols and you guys are far more in depth on the science because we don't have an organized like institute of sport because we have just good athletes in general. We don't really have to try to make them better because they're
True.
already really fucking good. I'm out of wherever they're at. So there's not a whole push behind the science of them getting better. And then if you're not pushing the science on that, you're probably not going to be pushing the science on the medical aspect for them either.
True.
And most of the
Us
research and like,
colonizers are trying to leap and really get ahead, you know.
yeah. But I mean, a lot of the money and the funding and stuff, it's really not driven towards sport in the US. It's driven towards like obesity. It's driven towards like diabetes research. Like all the research we have isn't really geared towards athletes.
Yeah, wow, yeah. I mean, yeah, it makes sense when you kind of put it in that light. Given, I guess even my talk at Coach Catalyst last year, when I did the research on that, I was dumbfounded. When I looked at the number, just the sheer numbers of like, you're one of the probably few that I know of that actually work with optimizing a performance athlete or a performance individual. I can imagine there will be so many physios, chiros, GPs, doctors that just have to tell people to stop eating shit. And if you lose 40 pounds, you're probably going to have less back pain, or you're probably going to be easier to manipulate and work with. Like like the numbers that I saw was absolutely staggering. I think less than 25% of the country actually got the recommended aerobic and resistance-based exercise and got their nutrient needs or the American recommendation dietary intake. Less than 25%. That's pretty like when you work that across a country of 360 million people, that's pretty fucking wild.
Yeah, I mean it's terrible here. Like I had a patient the other day. He wasn't an athlete. He's a school teacher, and he came in, and he's had like chronic low back pain, like pretty much chronic full spine pain. He's miserable. He's got pain like wrapping around into his groin, which is always a red flag for people. Like we're thinking
Yeah.
like prostate issues, like cancer, herniated disc, like something's going on. He had an MRI, everything was clean. And I'm sitting here talking to him, and like when I do intakes, like I dive deep. I want to know everything about you.
Mm-hmm.
So we just went into nutrition, and his first meal of the day is noon. Like, or he's like, it's around 12 or 1 o'clock. He's like, but I'm up at 5:30. So what I do is I just have 3 cups of coffee from like 5:30 to noon. And then I get a quick snack in, and then I have a one meal at dinner. Like, and that's it. So this guy's probably eating less than 1,200 calories a day. He's pumping himself probably full of 400, 500 mgs of caffeine a day to get through. And he told so he was 42 and he looked like he was 74. I mean, the guy was like hunched over, gray hair, like super like fragile.
Distressed.
Everything ached. Yeah, like everything ached. And I'm like, I'm trying to explain to him, like, your body, like I can do all the shit in the world for you, but you're not going to heal if you're not nourishing yourself. Two, his
Yeah.
sleep was all fucked up.
Yeah.
And then like he's looking for this magic pill, and I'm like, man, it's going to be months to fix this issue because it's not just a movement issue. It's like a
Yeah.
whole, it's a you issue. Like your sleep's fucked. You're slamming caffeine. Like you're not eating. I mean, I'm sure your testosterone's in the shitter.
Yeah.
Like everything. Like, and if your test is low, your body's going to ache. I mean, it's just such a multifactorial thing. And like those are the cases that people really don't like getting because from an like I'm cash based, meaning like I don't deal with the insurance companies.
Yeah.
But if you were to go like the insurance route, like no one's going to take the time to sit here and talk to you about, your food, your supplements,
Yeah.
everything else on top of your sleep habits, on top of this. Like they might, but it's going to get glanced over really quick because I can't bill for all that extra time that I'm going to do. It's going to
Yeah.
fall within a specific code and I only get that amount. And honestly, you're going to get you end up getting negotiated down. So I might say, hey, pay me $100 to the insurance company, and they go, ha, fuck you. Here's 72.50. So now I have to agree because I want to be in contract with that insurance company,
Yeah.
and then it just becomes a whole shit. So it's like we have insurance, and a lot of times it's like you go to the people to use your insurance, and they're not the best doctors that you're going to see.
That's
And now I think we're starting to see that more and more, like where people are not trusting at least for this generation, like people are trusting their doctors less and less. Like
yeah.
we're asking more questions.
Yeah.
And it's good because you're starting to see like, oh, my GP that I go to is shit, right?
Yeah.
Like they really don't know,
Yeah.
right? So then you're starting to seek out these cash-based practices. Plus in the US, like it's like, I don't know how it is for you guys, but you can have insurance and still pay a fuck ton. Like as a small business owner, I got lumped into this group like insurance thing. I pay between my wife and I $670 a month for the insurance, but like my insurance doesn't apply until I spend $14,000.
Oh, fuck. Oh man,
right?
it's
So like, yeah, I've got the insurance, but like, it's not very fucking helpful, is it?
yeah. I mean, if you're already 14 grand in the hole before you get like like a kickback or at least a reduction, then yeah, that's pretty fucking shit. That ends up being well for the average person that's running a small business, 14 grand up front first and foremost. Then you get some help, starts to become pretty pricey.
Yeah, like it's insane.
And
But I think United Healthcare is a really prominent healthcare system in the US. Their CEO made, fuck, I can't tell you how many billion that company made last year. But that's when I was taking insurance, that was the company that gave me the most denials.
shocking.
They had the hardest restrictions of any company I've ever like was in contract with. You would only get paid $55 no matter what you did. If you spent 2 seconds or 2 hours, you got paid the exact fucking same. If I needed to order imaging, I had to jump through a bunch of hoops. And sometimes these people would like get denials. Like I had someone who like legitimately could not walk. She got wheeled in a wheelchair. And I like requested for an MRI after only treating her 2 times, but I'm like, this person's fucked. I'm not gonna be able to help them. And I got a denial. So I had to hop on a phone call and argue my case with someone who's never seen this person and explain to them why they need the MRI.
That's fucked. That just like
Yeah.
it's such a unique system in that you know you probably end up having more fun and more like fulfillment working with athletes because you know they've got the pockets to be able to afford to do the stuff and get the things done that you need them to do versus like the average person that comes in that you want to help and there's so many hoops and bounds and red tape to actually get them the result they need to just function at life or progress to the next level. Like it it doesn't seem supportive of people trying to come up versus the people who are already there. Because you have the cash to do it, so you're going to do it because you can afford it. And you know that's the best practice. And that doctor said, "Hey, for this amount of money, go get these things done." Like, yep, cool, I can do it. Especially if you're like an elite athlete who has that fucking check coming in, versus the average person who's like, you have to choose between this or eating this week. Well, yeah, I'm probably going to eat
Yeah.
this so I don't die.
Right. And that like it's just kind of crazy. So I try to make it like as affordable like as possible for the people that I work with. Um and like I've even like transitioned towards having a hybrid model to where like you can come in and get the hands-on work in person. It's a little more expensive, but like we can do online programming and just rehab you through that at
Yeah,
like the cost of like a coffee a day for a
yeah,
month. Like right. So that's the trick. And that's the bad rap that like a lot of cash practitioners get is like, oh, you're just after the money. Like, no, when you
yeah,
actually start to explain, people have no fucking clue. Like when you actually start to explain like how the insurance game works, like everyone's like, oh, that's a fucking scam. I'm like, yeah,
yeah.
now you know why I don't want to deal with it.
Yeah, that like over here we don't have like yeah our private health you still generally have to pay like you sort of pick and choose and build your private health model like what you want like if you want vision eye health dental chiro whatever like a lot of the systems have that option to pay for it to pick and choose what you want and you might still pay out of pocket when you get there but you get a fair decent return or rebate on that pricing but even at the public level like you aren't paying a lot to still get decent care. So when you hear that a country like America with the economy and the GDP and just the sheer level of success in things that you have, that you've got so much red tape, limitation, boundaries to get someone healthy again, blows the absolute shit out of my mind. And especially then to have people like question, like, because I wouldn't like, had you not explain how that works, I have no idea that you as a cash practitioner operate that way. Versus like, I always thought you just had to use insurances. We've always heard of like insurances, like, you watch some sort of like hospital movie or TV show and like someone drops dead because their insurance didn't cover it. So we've always heard of the insurance model, but never in the way you've kind of described it, where that's how bad it gets. And the fact that the person taking cash is actually probably doing the good deed. I'm sure there are shitty cash practitioners, but like having a multifactorial skill set like you and still taking the cash option so you can actually provide that service fairly is, I think, very underrated and under misunderstood.
Right. And I mean, the whole, even the, like into the hospital system, like when my wife got her appendix taken out, you had to pay, I mean, one, it's kind of fucked up. So they do this on purpose with insurance is that because you're again they're going to try and negotiate your rate down. So what you can do is say, well, I'm going to charge $500, and then they go, okay, we'll pay 300 of it. So it's a game because if I would have been like, oh, it's just going to be 300. Well, now they're going to go, oh, it's actually 175. Because it's again, at the end of the day, you're trying to create a profit. So you're
Yeah.
always like highballing these numbers because they're going to come back down. So, and it's fucked up how it's like that, right? But I mean, some of these systems, and then some of the when she got transported in the ambulance, that ambulance like technically wasn't like under insurance, so they wanted $3,000 for the 20-minute ride, like to
Oh yeah,
get to the
that mind
hospital.
blows Australians. That I've heard that one, and that
Right.
like talk to any Australian, that's a mind blowing concept.
Well, luckily my mother works in like she worked in the insurance game. So what happened was the ambulance company actually marked it as like non-necessary when they submitted the bills. It was more of like a choice ride rather than like, because my wife picked the hospital because she works in the hospital. She was like, I want to go to this surgeon because I know the surgeon.
Mhm.
Well, they could have taken her to a like quote unquote closer hospital, all right? But she wanted to go to this one. So they marked it as choice rather than as necessary. Well, then that massively changed the bill. So instead of having to pay $150, it was now going to be 3 grand. But that was a fuck up. That was a fuck up on their part. So unless like my mother and my wife caught that, they would have had to like pay all this extra money. That's why medical debt is so high in the US. I think it's actually like one of the highest like debt amounts that we have. I think it's like surpassing almost like student loan debt now. And it's just, yeah, it's fucked, dude. Like because again, they're negotiating these rates, so they just highball everybody. And if you don't have the insurance, like here's the highball offer.
Oh, that's wild. I
So
mean,
a Band-Aid might cost $32 in the ER. One Band-Aid might cost $32 in the ER when it costs 78 cents at the grocery store.
yeah, that's fucking ludicrous. Like when you hear shit like that, like it makes sense. Like when you start wondering why guys like yourself want to prefer working with them. When I study the difference, like when I'm like so my degree is in clinical psych, but a lot of my study ends up being around performance psych. That's the route I want to take. And one of the cool concepts that we got taught in the sport and performance psych actual unit was that people misunderstand a lot of the aspects of psychology in regards to performance versus like someone in a clinical setting. We're looking at optimizing the human, whereas in a clinical setting, you're looking at treating the deficit. And that deficit is like cognitive or psychological neuro deficit or something like that. In the performance route, we're looking at optimizing that very same thing. With like you want it to be at a baseline level to then increase and perform. And that, like by the same degree, sounds almost like what you pretty much you do, where you can have the guys that are in a deficit position and you need to just return them to just everyday life, and that ends up being a shit ton more red tape, more problems to go through, probably going to get denied a lot of the time, and it's just probably not going to be as fulfilling. But then you get the athletes, and the idea is more so getting them to the optimal level to perform at like better routes, or I guess better feats of what they're capable of doing, versus just getting the person from deficit to somewhat functional. That'd be like pretty like a similar, I guess, concept.
Mm. Yeah, like I still do both. Like I got out of the insurance game, but it's still affordable enough to where people will
Yeah,
come see me. Like otherwise, because my thing is like if yeah, you might pay, whatever 400 this month to get better, but would you rather 400 to be better in 1 month than pay like 350 to get better in 3 months? Like I
yeah,
want to get back as fast as possible. I don't care like how much I got to spend within reason.
yeah,
And once you explain it to and I tell people like, since you're paying cash, like I have to get a result.
yeah,
If I'm not getting a result, you're not going to come back because you're not
yeah,
just going to use like you use your insurance. You don't really care. Like so now the onus is on me, like to get you better. But at the same time, I can then dive deep into these concepts of like the psychology behind things. Like I do a lot of like some of the cognitive behavioral therapy stuff, like restructuring mindsets, all
mhm,
these things, and then even up like yesterday, I had a teenage athlete. Um, she is such a high achiever and she works herself up into like a tizzy sometimes. And all I did was just a simple like carbon dioxide tolerance test to see where we're at. And she made it 11 seconds before she needed to take a breath. Right? Like not great because ideally I would want to get you up to like 20 plus. So now you're getting like amygdala induced apnea, right? You're triggering a fear response. So
mhm,
now your tolerance for carbon dioxide goes way down. So now you'll make up for it by hyperventilating.
yeah,
So then you can get into the neurochem side of things. And again, like this just comes back to like simple habits of just like, getting sunlight. She was a night owl. Like she says she's had terrible sleep her whole life. So what time do you go to bed? She goes, I try to go to bed at like 10, but my mind's always like running, and then I sleep for like 2 hours, then I wake up, and this, that, and the other. And I asked her, how much sunlight do you get throughout the day? She goes, not a whole lot. I said, well, that's a problem, because she also told me she takes 15 milligrams of melatonin. You guys can't get that over the counter, can you, over there?
Oh, I ordered in from America to get mine, but yeah, we can't get it over the counter.
Okay. Yeah, so that blows my mind. Because technically, like, it is kind of like a pro hormone in a way.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but I've actually used that with bodybuilders, like in relation to high dosing it to combat some of like some estrogen issues, rather than putting somebody like their doctor giving them dim or something else,
Yeah.
which then ends up with like because they've actually used melatonin in breast cancer research.
Interesting.
Yeah. But yeah, random useless fact. So she'd been taking she'd been taking 15 milligrams of melatonin and still not sleeping, right? That would put most people out.
Yeah, that's impressive.
And so what happens is, if she's not getting sunlight throughout the day, when you first get eyes on sunlight in the day, like you get the sunlight hits your eyes, and then it upregulates this nucleus, and sorry, it's like pissing down rain outside. So it upregulates this nucleus in the brain, and what it does is it shuts down melatonin release, and then you start making serotonin, and that's kind of how we wake up throughout the day. So as you get more and more sunlight, it builds throughout the day, and then when the sun starts to set, it starts to go down, and then red light hits, and then that's where we start to release melatonin, right? But it's like yin and yang. If all I'm doing is just getting a shit ton of melatonin, I'm getting no sunlight, no serotonin.
Yeah.
If the body doesn't recognize that I'm having more melatonin. All it recognizes is that I'm deficient in the serotonin, like from the sunlight. I'm deficient in sunlight, essentially. Like, when did you all be best as a kid? Like when you were out playing all day
Yeah.
long, because you're out in the sun all day long, right? So if I get a bunch of sunlight throughout the day, that makes it easier to go to sleep. So it's not just like getting sunlight first thing in the morning, it's actually like getting a steady dose throughout the day, which then makes it easier to then release the melatonin and actually utilize it. Because it's like, if I have a shit ton of serotonin, the moment that this melatonin gets released, it's a bigger gap to now close. So the melatonin is going to be far more beneficial. Whereas if it's just here to here, bumping up my melatonin isn't that big of a deal to my body.
Yeah. It's definitely a like what you're describing is such a unique model of approach. Like the one thing I'll give you, even like, the level of education and stuff that you have, the unique approach is, I've worked with physios and stuff in Australia, I've worked with chiros, I've worked with manipulative therapists and stuff like that. And the majority of them aren't taking that route of understanding comprehension, which I guess leads to like, the initial reason why we said, like, I bring people on that are unique in what they do. Not a lot of therapists, I feel, are at the level where you are to understand these things, like, or to at least understand the intricacy of at play and how it could be impacting. Like, a lot of people don't look at the system; they look at the individual part. Well, they'll say, there's a break here, or this muscle's a little weak here, there's some internal rotation there, and that's the focus of treatment. But how many are actually sitting there going, okay, so what's your sleep like, and why is this? Oh, this is happening here. Oh, cortisol's here. Like, high here, we're getting inflammation. This isn't working. You're not resting and recovering. You're nutrient deficient. Therefore, all those things are going to impact your actual recoverability. It's not as common, I feel, as what it probably should be. Also, understand it's not everyone's route of education or scope of practice, but to be at that level where you're actually looking at the more global aspect of the system rather than just one individual unique part, I think is definitely a testament to you in the understanding and the desire to treat someone versus just make money.
And I think it just came down to like my frustration of, why did some patients get better and others didn't?
Yeah.
There's more to the equation. So that's where I started getting into like the sleep wake cycles. And then you dive into like the nutrition and supplementation side of things. Then you get into the blood work side of things. So that I do that with every patient I have. Like, I'll look at their blood work. We'll go through like what's their whole daily routine from wake to sleep. How are things getting set up? How much sunlight am I getting throughout the day? What's my carbon dioxide tolerance? So back to this girl, like there's a fantastic like paper around this amygdala induced apnea, right? So when there's a stressful situation, if you think about it, like if you watch your favorite sports team and the game's on the line, what does everybody do? They hold their breath because it's a stressful situation.
Yeah.
So when I do that, I actually heighten my fear response. So now I make up for it by then hyperventilating to balance this out. So my carbon dioxide tolerance actually drops, because if I have a high carbon dioxide level in my blood, that actually triggers a fear avoidance. And we've actually measured this on people. So we've actually like hooked mass stuff to people and pumped them full of CO2, and they have panic attacks. So if I actually have a greater affinity to be able to tolerate the CO2, I don't freak out nearly as much.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why if you have someone hold their breath and they only make it like 10 seconds, I know like they have anxiety. I know that they have all this stuff. So yeah, I could pick it up through the tone of their voice and everything else, but I could just do that quick test and then figure out what's going on. So I use that to kind of drive down and almost down regulate them out of this stress state, because they're living in this state of like constant stress and fear. So I asked her, I'm like, how are you when you have to do a public presentation? She's like, I can't do it. I freak out. Like my hands get sweaty. I start, panicking and everything else. But then we just went back through a couple of like deep breathing things and trying to boost this thing back up. I got her back up to 35 seconds on that CO2 tolerance test within 2 minutes. And all of a sudden she's not like her like little like fidgeting like tick was just doing this with her like nails. Once we got her up to like past 25, 30 seconds, she stopped doing that. She requires this overstimulation. That's why she can't sleep. She needs constant stimulation. I said, do you go for walks outside? Are you on your phone? She goes, no, but I have music playing in the background. There's always something. If she goes to sleep, there's a fan on, or otherwise she can't sleep. She can't sit still unless she fidgets. She lives in a world of overstimulation. Like, no shit, she can't come back down. It's uncomfortable.
Yeah. That's not your default position.
Right. And so like I dive into that with some of the kids that I work with now, and just having that approach again of like treating the whole person. Because if you just went to somebody, random off the street that you found on the internet, you're probably not getting that approach.
Yeah, like it's not to toot your own horn, but I mean, feel free to. Do you find that you're a rare breed of practitioner?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few that are actually really, really good in like Columbus, Ohio, where I'm at. But if you talk to most of these people about the concepts, like they don't really understand where I'm coming from. Perfect example, I had a call with a physio at the University of Iowa. So they had this football player. They've been working with him for a full year,
Mm-hmm.
and his knee was still bothering him. So he came into town. I took a look at him and worked with him for 2 hours and got more done in that 2 hours than they got done in the entire year with him. So he went back and had to do testing, and all they were doing the isokinetic, just looking at like, peak knee torque and everything else. Rate of force development from the quad, if there was a lag in the quad and all this stuff for knee health. And I'm like, they're attacking the wrong thing. Like all they're doing is chasing the numbers. And that's the biggest fault within sports science now, is we're getting too deep into the numbers,
Mm-hmm.
and all we're doing is chasing the quantitative.
Mm-hmm.
But the way that I view it is the qualitative drives the quantitative. If I chase the qualitative result, the quantitative will easily follow.
Yeah.
And around the sports science, they're trying to do the opposite. They're trying to use the quantitative to then drive the qualitative response, and it doesn't work like that. So, I used this approach, and he went back and he crushed the testing. I mean, they were like, holy shit, what have you been doing? And I worked for him for 2 hours, right? They've been with him for a whole year. So I called up his physio and was explaining the approach. And because it didn't fall under his like quantitative reasoning, and he didn't like some of the stuff that I was doing, he just kind of disregarded it. Like imagine someone comes in and does your job better than you in 2 hours that you've had a whole fucking year of doing, and you just like, nah, it's bullshit. Like, no, I would want to learn from you. I might not agree with everything, but I want to know why you're better than me. And I think the ego realm of things is just so bad. Like, am I a cocky dickhead? Fuck yeah. Like, but at the same time, I know better than me, and I need to go listen to them.
Yeah, that's like, I mean, it's one of the traits that I've found in people that either determine success or don't, is you're always going to find someone better than you. And there's always going to be someone who's better than you at what you do, or at least some degree for most parts of the world. There's going to be someone who's better than you. And when you encounter that person, if you're incapable of recognizing that without your ego getting hurt and saying, "Hey, how the fuck do I learn from you?" then you are in pretty much guaranteeing that you aren't going to be successful, or at least you're not going to progress any further than where you currently are, because there is always going to be someone up the pecking order that you can learn from and go, well, my growth mindset is either going to allow me to learn and get better, or I'm going to fix this, and my fixed mindset is going to make me think that I'm the best. And the second someone challenges that, I'm not going to try, and I'm just going to disregard that person. and that's going to limit my rate of growth. I'm not going to get better. And that, as a practitioner of any sport, as a coach in any sport, that's probably the most arrogant, ignorant thing you can do when it comes to delivering to your clients.
Right. And again, it goes back to this like health insurance versus cash-based practice. He's employed by the University of Iowa. There's no threat to his job.
Yeah.
Unless you're really terrible. Like people will always come to see him because he's within the university hospital setting. So the insurance will cover it. So the athletes are forced to see him because he's connected to the team. So there's no checks and balance system. He's not being vetted on any criteria, and he's not being judged upon the results. Like, can you beat the natural history? Can you get people back far better than they were before? And what's your time frame of doing so? I'm vetted on that, but nobody else is. So now I have to be a lot better. So it's going to change my mindset. I have to get every little, inch out of this that I can. Whereas if I come from a stable practice where people are already just getting fed to me because I take their insurance, like I don't have to work nearly as hard.
That leads me to another question that I was literally just thinking on. Who do you find better to work with in terms of the adherence and coachability? The general person, or like regardless of insurance, insurance will probably actually play a part of it because obviously there's an emotional buy-in financially. But who is better to work with, the athlete who's trying to get back to their contract, or the person who's trying to reduce pain and kind of get back to life?
I like the reduced pain, like get back to life people. More so just because it's more of a challenge. Athletes will inherently get better no matter what you do.
Yeah,
Like it's not hard to read. When people brag about like, oh, I've got this athlete, and they play at the highest level. It's like they would have been fucking good with or without you, bud.
yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah,
not that hard. Like same thing. If you look at like a lot of the research around PRP injections, the research is 50-50, but every athlete that gets it done, it works great. Why? Because their body's naturally healing itself. They're providing the optimal environment. So it doesn't really take much. It does take skill, but it doesn't take that much skill to try and fix some of this shit up. So that's why the level of like quality of care they get is like not that great. So I had a handful of hockey players fly me up to Boston to go work on them. Um, and the reason that they brought me in is because I was seeing shit and doing stuff that they had never seen or heard of or gone through. So I was like even testing their vision. I'm like, I want to make sure that you can make the right reads on the ice. And they were like mind blown that someone was doing that with them and they've never had that done before. And it's like basic shit.
yeah.
So, I mean, I do enjoy working with the athletes. I also think it depends on the sport. Like I love working with hockey because the guys are great.
Yeah,
NFL, I got a lot of heads like that I've worked with.
yeah,
Um, Same thing like MMA, hit or miss. So it's really dependent upon the sport. But I would say I like working with just the individual, like that's not a pro athlete, just
mhm.
because it's more of a challenge.
Yeah. Again, it's indicative of you and the desire to actually like make a healthy impact. I guess that it's such a unique challenge that you have to be better to fix it. And if you can't fix it, you're going to find out how. So the next time you meet someone, that obviously isn't going to happen again, right?
Yeah. Like honestly, a lot of the stuff that I do with my pro athletes, I just do with my Gen Pop.
Mm-hmm.
Like someone asked me the other day, they're like, how do you rehab, the 70-year-old lady that gets on your table as opposed to like the 24-year-old, professional athlete? I said both of them had the same exact drill. Like people are trying to dumb down shit, like, and make it as if like we're using these really high level drills for these pro athletes. Like, no, a lot of them just need the basics.
Yeah.
And I gave this drill to this old lady and the same thing I just gave to this pro athlete, and he was like mind blown.
The athlete was mind blown, or she was?
The athlete. The athlete was like, what the fuck? Like, I'm doing the same thing as like an 80-year-old lady to an extent. Like, there are some like bullshit rehab protocols where people are just doing like clamshells because their knees fucked up. And I'm like, that's not going to help you get back on the field. Like, there
Yeah.
is like that. I mean, that type of basic stuff, like, that's useless. But like, in some of the drills I do, like, yeah, they're fucking hard, but they are like a basic drill that I do. Like, it's like, like the foam roller bridge that got popularized by David Gray. Like I use that with, the 70-year-old lady and I use that with the 24-year-old pro athlete.
That's fair. That's fair. I mean, not fair,
I
but I mean,
mean,
it's hard.
yeah, like it's tough to do when it's done correctly. And like that always, And that's the other thing too, is like when you get into the weeds, like I always tell people I major in the minors. Like I harp on the biomechanics of things really hard because it's all about sensation and what I'm feeling and where I'm getting it at.
Mhm.
And a lot of just standardized physio isn't about that. It's just do this drill. Like I care about more, like I train the adaptation, like not the exercise. And this is where when I was teaching at the university level, like I taught like exercise science, and that was what I would harp on to my students all the time. Like you can put someone in a squat, and depending on how you do the squat, it's going to hypertrophy like muscles differently.
Yeah.
You can use that same concept within rehab though,
Yeah.
and people don't try and apply. So now you get into the whole like progression versus regression thing. Like, how would you regress a push-up? Most people go, well, I'm going to do an incline push-up. Does an incline bench feel the same as a flat bench to you?
No.
Fuck no. It works different muscles. It's like a
Yeah.
different targeted line of force and everything else. So is that really a regression? Like, no, it's something completely different.
Yeah.
So that shit drives me nuts. So that's where I tell people, like, I want to get you into deeper thinking. Like, don't just learn this basic, like, oh, do this exercise and then here's a regression if I can't do it. Cause like, no, now you're training a completely different quality. So again, like chase the adaptation, not the exercise.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. That's good. I think a lot of people benefit from like from that perspective of programming and training, even at like a body composition, like bodybuilding aspect, looking at just actually understanding the adaptation you're trying to create rather than just simply I do these exercises. Like it's such almost a misdemeanor, but like a misconception. The amount of people that come to me thinking like their program has to exist with certain exercises, or like this guy said I had to, like previous coaches said I had to do this movement. I'm like, if it doesn't suit what we're trying to achieve, why do you have to do it? Or if this is causing pain, or if this is causing a problem, we can't deal with it. Why would I give you a squat if you have knee problems? Or why would I give you those things straight away? Where like, if this is the problem, why would we just program that because it's an exercise? It just doesn't make sense. We're trying to create a specific adaptation
Right.
to your body to occur. So why would I give it to you because exercise?
Yeah. And that, like, that's the shit that drives me nuts. But that's the standard of care of what you're going to get from like a regular coach or a regular physio. Like, that's the school of thought. Do this exercise for this condition. But if the muscle is not responding the same, like the other day I had someone do like a lateral band walk, or like it's nicknamed like a monster walk.
Mhm.
Her quads were burning the whole time. Like that's a hip drill, not a quad drill.
Yeah,
Like you should be
yeah, yeah,
feeling like so obviously like this is not the right drill for the right person. So
yeah,
then I had to tweak this around. So I mean I think that's like my biggest gripe. But again, you can't quantify that.
yeah,
You can't, that's not a research study,
yeah.
right? If it's not on a research study, like no one's gonna believe you now. And
That's
so that's where it gets into.
that's one of my biggest like exercise science gripes. Actually, just any sports or nutrition gripe really in study is this idea that the absence of evidence is evidence for its absence, and that you can like,
And
well, it's not in the paper, but it's not in a paper, therefore you can't do it. But there's so many things that can't be tested for or studied, or like the controls to make that study possible are so internally controlled that the external generability can't be applied. And it's like to get that study complete or to even see that the review of that result, it's not even going to be useful in the general client sense. So do we wait for the research or do we actually try it? But then you get these people that are just so evidence-based practitioner that they're just not willing to try anything outside of the box. It's like, well, it's not in this study, therefore I can't do it. And it's like, that's just not how you approach. Humans are not systemized that much that you can do that, that you're leaving so much on the table.
I think that's also like one of my biggest gripes. There's a hilarious research paper about like, do you actually need a parachute to jump out of an airplane? Right? Like they submitted that as a fucking joke, as a fuck you to people, but it's like it's entirely true. Like, like, do I actually need this to jump out of the airplane? Like we have no research to show that it actually helps. So why are we using it?
That's fantastic. That's so good.
Like that's one of my favorite research papers. But even getting into the nuances of like actually being able to understand research, like most people really don't know how to read a research paper. Or we look at group data instead of individual data. Like I
Mhm,
care about individual data. That's why I'm big on case studies. I love reading case studies.
mhm.
Perfect example was this is probably 6 years ago now. Um, tendinopathy research really started to have like a big boom between like Ebony Rio's work and Barr's work and all this stuff. And isometrics became all the rage because we showed that it can decrease pain. So everybody started doing isometrics to decrease pain and to help tendon health. Well, the only problem was 2 years later, they went back through and they did individualized data on it, and they found some people actually got worse, some people stayed the same, and some people got better. But the people who got better at such a greater rate that it made all the group data look like a positive trend.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with like a lot of the research that we have. Like group data is great, but it doesn't really tell me like how everybody's going to respond. It's just telling me how the group as a whole is going to respond.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I use that. People came in, I started using isometrics because I read the research and I was like, well, this is great. That makes sense. And I started using it and I go, well, fuck, now this person's, elbow's pissed off more. Why is this happening? The research tells me that this should be working.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
Yeah. That the critical level of thinking applied to actually understand research, I think, is definitely, like I said, it's a lapsed skill that people don't seem to possess. Obviously, not don't seem to possess. It is something to learn, and like for psychology, we have to do 3 years of learning to read research, and we got to conduct research to actually get even your undergraduate to then qualify to go to your postgraduate route. Like, it's a mandatory subject you have to do to be able to conduct, operate, and read such clinical literature. And I still don't even think that I'm an expert at it. There's people who call themselves evidence-based practitioners that have never actually even been to university to understand how to read papers. They just go abstract conclusion, subtract my fucking opinion, and therefore or equate my opinion, and that's their essence of reading research. And it's like, well, fuck, hang on, man. There's so much into this that you have to apply to understand. You don't just get through university without really learning to read research properly. But so many people just don't get it. Just go, here's a link, abstract conclusion, my opinion. That's exactly what the paper said, without reading anything to do with the actual construct of the paper. And it's like, that's just not how evidence works.
I mean, there's so many shit things within like research design and everything else. I mean, I was reading a systematic review on or it wasn't even, I don't think it was a systematic review. I think it was just an RCT on fish oil. And they showed that fish oil wasn't more beneficial than the placebo for driving down inflammation. Well, guess what the placebo was? Olive oil. No fucking shit. Like olive oil is beneficial. It naturally, it's going to drive down inflammation. It's healthy for you. So like that blows my mind. And the thing is, if you don't know that, like, how are you going to interpret this research paper? Like it blows my mind. And then same thing, like I hate systematic reviews because they're based upon the reviewer who's writing it. Does this reviewer know how to speak Spanish? If not, then no Spanish research paper is now getting included, or Chinese or Japanese or whatever else. Right. So now that's a big limiting factor because there's people that, don't speak English that also do research, and they do really fucking good research.
Yeah.
So like that becomes a major problem. Right. And then I remember reading a study based on it was stretching. It was like a Nuzzo et al.'s paper that came out. And the systematic review essentially said like stretching's like not great. It does this, it hampers performance, it does that, it does that. But at the end of the paper it goes, if you just add in a dynamic warm-up, like all these negative effects now go away. So I static stretch the shit out of my people, and people go, don't you know that decreases power? Well, if you read like the RCTs where that come from, they had these people stretch for like 45 seconds and then go hit a 1 rep max. Like, when do you ever do that in the gym? That's so removed from what actually happens. Like, no fucking shit.
Yeah.
But like, if you don't know how to read the paper, you're just going to assume that this is gospel. And so many like famous fitness influencers and fit pros that don't know shit are now like spouting these things of like, oh, stretching is nonsense. Stretching is, I can't tell you how many times I've been to a conference and like listened to that. And I'm like, this person definitely didn't actually read the whole paper.
Yeah. Just use that to vet and it's like, all right, I'm not listening to anything you have to say.
Yeah. After that, just start tuning out. Yeah, it just drives me.
Well, it was away for 2 hours. Mate, we could ramble for fucking, 3 hours. I know you got a jet. I've got a couple of questions I'd like to finish off the podcast with because, we could sit here and pick your brain forever. Like I said, there's a reason why I brought you on. And I think your unique approach to not even just rehabilitation, but as a practitioner, especially in America, is something that people need to be more aware of, or at least set a standard that needs to become more commonplace. Give us what would be your first, well, I guess your first 1 or 2 book recommendations that people should read immediately. I don't care what it is about, like your variation of knowledge. What would be your 2 preferred or recommended books for people to read on any topic that you think would be beneficial?
Oh, fuck. That's a tough one. My bookcase is like here, so I'm trying to look
Yeah.
to see what am I
If I narrowed it
that
down
I'm
just to
going.
rehab, you would have had something. But I was like, no, you've definitely got more knowledge than that. So you got to pick two of anything.
Um, shit. I would say, um, Breathe by James Nestor is like a classic. Like it's a very simple book that anyone can read to actually like learn to understand the effects of breath
Mhm.
that we have. I think that's a phenomenal book. And then the other one, fuck, I'm blanking on the name. Mind Over Muscle.
Mhm.
Um, it's a it's actually a book like more so about like judo. Um, but it just tells you about like how to, I'm big on like Eastern philosophy, and it
Mhm.
just kind of tells you like how to go about like life and adapting to certain situations, and then understanding like the Japanese term is called like wabi sabi, like
Mhm.
essentially being flexible but not too rigid where something breaks, like essentially go with the flow.
Mhm.
And I think that's such a powerful thing. So like I'm really big on like some of the like psychology aspects of stuff. Like I can harp on the biomechanics and all that shit, but if you don't know how to talk to a person and crack through their psyche, like it's
Yeah.
useless. They're
Yeah.
not gonna get on. So like that's why Cav makes everyone read Dale Carnegie's book.
How
Fucking
people? No, how to,
yeah, How to Win Friends and Influence People.
that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why he makes every person read that. Every intern has to read that book. I even made my interns read that book. Like I think it's phenomenal.
Yeah. Yeah. It's my current audiobook actually on drives at the moment. I didn't even know Cav until I Cav asked what books I was reading. He's like, "Oh, that's a book I make everyone read." And I was like, "Well, there you go. That's
Yeah.
fucking. It's been a good book." Some of you
Yeah.
listen to
So
it, like some of you listen to it, and you're just like, people don't know this, and then you get to other parts, like, okay, that makes sense.
yeah, it's just small stuff. Like dude, I use so much psych going into like into my appointments and everything else. Like I even have a system where I teach it to people. It's just breaking it down. We call it like like a 3D approach. Like when someone first come in like to the clinic, like we have to de-escalate the situation. Someone's usually nervous about what's
Mhm.
going on. They don't know what to expect, yada yada yada. So I always ask them like a closed-ended question initially, and then I ask them an open-ended question to which they know the answer. Right? Usually, how's your day? Good. Do you find the place all right? Like, how was traffic for you on the way over? I don't know the fucking answer. They could just make something up. But now I've given them, I'm starting to jog their memories. So now they're going to start to remember stuff from their past or the history, anything else. Their brain's already going.
Mhm.
But now I built their confidence because I'm asking them questions to which they already know the answer to.
Yeah.
Right. So I use that effect. Same thing. Like I'll use the chameleon effect on people to see if I'm getting buy-in or not. Right. I'll see to see if they're trying to copy what I do.
No.
Or if I'm not getting it, I'm copy what they do to try and like create a submissive response. Same thing when I put people on a table and I talk to them, my stool is always lower than the table because it creates a power dynamic of them looking down on me, creates confidence in themselves.
I like
So I'm
that.
just mind fucking people. Right. And they have no
I'm fun with this.
right. So that's what I like. That's so I harp on that so heavily. It's the psychological aspect of stuff. And that's why it's so easy for me to get buy-in, like with a 70-year-old woman and a 24-year-old professional athlete.
I love that. That's being conscious of your client. That's actually like taking on paying attention.
Yeah, so I loved it because I usually host a bunch of interns and I took my intern through one of that, and then he never understood why I did the things that I do, and I'm like, dude, I'm running processes in the back of my mind, like psychologically trying to manipulate you, right? By even just my body language or certain words that I'm saying or the tone of
Mhm.
my voice. And then he caught on to that and he was pissed. He was like, "You've been fucking with me this whole time I've been here this semester, haven't you?" I'm like, "Absolutely, man."
Oh, that's fantastic. All right, last question.
Yeah.
For you guys, it's not really the same because well, you're not really the fucking diet restricted bodybuilder, but it's NFL Grand Final Sunday. What is your go-to meal, free meal, cheat meal, refeed, whatever fucking term you want to use to call it? What are you loading up on the plate?
Ooh, fuck, that's a tough one. I'm a big like taco guy. I love tacos and I love burgers. I love ground beef in general, because it's so versatile. You can make it into anything.
Yeah.
So like anything ground beef related, like I'm gonna eat a whole like pound of it.
I found the
I
answer
would say
to the
burgers and
question.
fries.
I found the answer
Yeah,
to this
burgers and fries.
so regional.
Yeah, it's extremely regional. Like if you go down south, you might get some barbecue answers.
Yep.
If you're on the coast, you might get yeah. So it just depends where you're from. But it's really hard to fuck a burger up.
It is. It is. The DC was the first time I ever had In and Out. No, Five Guys. Five Guys.
Yeah.
Five Guys. DC was the first
Yeah.
time I
Five
had Five Guys.
is based around there.
That was a fucking mind fuck. Like I enjoy Australian burgers, but Jesus Christ, we like because Brooklyn was in prep, so we had one. I was like, I have one meal with you that will like be off plan, and we got the Five Guys. Oh, bro. After a day of like
But
30,000 steps walking around Washington, it was phenomenal.
there's a place here in Columbus, and it's a full pound burger, and it comes with, I think it's like a half pound of like salami or pastrami, and then they put French fries on top of the burger, and then they've got like a whole host of other shit, and then it comes with a shot of whiskey.
Because why not? Because why not? Why
American
not?
dream.
Okay.
Bigger and better, man.
You're better in every way, including your cholesterol levels. Anything?
Oh yeah.
Final question about you though. Is there anything you have coming up that listeners or viewers should be subscribing to, following that you're about to do that we can pay attention to? Pretty much drop it, and we'll make sure it's in the link notes. But yeah, is there anything you got coming up at the moment?
Um, Nothing released as of yet. I'm starting to build out more like preset templates of like just some like little injury stuff here and there. I'm trying to like figure out what I want to kind of make my next thing. I guess I'm ramping up more of like the online rehab side of things.
Mhm.
So yeah, people have questions on either if it's just like a one-off consult or if they want to go on a program like of just where it's, completely tailored to you. And it's not just, the rehab, it's everything that we just talked about, the
Mhm.
psychological aspect, the nutrition, supplementation, all that shit. It's all inclusive. Um, yeah, people have questions on that. They can usually reach out to me. Going to start pushing that a little bit harder, I think.
Awesome. We'll make sure we'll drop all your Instagram handles and whatnot and the emails and stuff in the show notes for the episode. But mate, I appreciate your brain. We've put it right on the limit. I didn't realize it got to 6:30 so quickly. I appreciate your time. Absolute pleasure being able to talk to you guys. So I mean, I look forward to being able to catch up more when we're actually over there. We're coming back in August, so hopefully we can get some meals in and get some training in and catch up.
Yeah, how long are you here for?
We're doing 3 to 4 weeks in August and then 2 or 3 weeks in Christmas.
Where are you going? What part? Country?
We're going to be everywhere, as far as I know. Like we're looking at, we're stopping on the West Coast first. Usually that's where the flight goes anyway. So we'll do West Coast. We're catching up with Danny in Texas. Paul's going to be down there as well. We've got a fair bit of stuff planned for the East Coast. We're trying to put together some more like smaller seminars, training seminars, workshops, and stuff like that, just on our behalf. And then pair it off with guys like, we're doing some stuff with CJ, with Colin, with Danny and Paul, with more so from Marikel. So we're trying to get a couple of you guys that actually have places and facilities and stuff where we can just absolutely send it and train and get some content and workshops. So yeah, we're going to be everywhere.
Perfect.
We'll have to stop by Columbus, Ohio and check Inferno.
Yeah, I was about to say, are you coming for everyone pops in for the Arnold? That's the new thing now. Everybody loves the
I wish
Arnold.
I was
But
coming for the Arnold, but no. I mean, I love that everyone's getting like vested in bodybuilding, but yeah, Columbus, Ohio, I'm sure it's still a place to check out without the Arnold's there.
yeah, I'd say Arnold, the other big weekend is Swiss, like in October. That's the real big one for like on
Yeah,
the presenter side of things.
Cav keeps wanting me to go to that one as well. I'm going to go broke with all the flights and trips that we got to go to until we move over there.
How long's the visa they get if you come over?
The
How many
visa.
weeks? Yeah. Do you guys need a
Uh,
visa or not?
yeah, we're on some. It's called like the E2 visa, which is basically just like we're part of some international program with America. I'm pretty sure it's like 6 months.
Oh shit.
Yeah, it's like
Okay.
you don't need like it's a pretty widely accepted visa for a long period of time because it's a travel holiday visa with return options versus like coming for business or to make money.
Yeah. Okay.
So something like that. Anyway, yeah, mate, I'll let you go because you got to shoot. But I really appreciate your time and obviously your brain being on here. And no doubt we're going to actually pick that apart a bit more and chat some shit in the group. So appreciate it.
Yeah. Appreciate you having me on, man.